Hello, class. Today I'm going to talk about motor neurons in the body and describe what they are, their structure and function, and clinical significance. The term motor neuron makes one think that there is only one type of neuron that is responsible for the conduct of movement in the body. However, that is not the fact at all. The term motor neuron involves the upper and lower neurons that have their own point of origin, synaptic points, pathways in the body, neurotransmitters, and lesion sites. These types of neurons are made up of tightly controlled and complex circuits that allow for involuntary and voluntary movements within the body. The upper and lower motor neurons form a two-neuron circuit in which the upper motor neurons originate in the cerebral cortex and travel down to the brainstem and spinal cord. The lower motor neurons originate in the spinal cord and go on to innervate, which means supply muscles and glands within the body. The upper and lower motor neurons use different neurotransmitters to relay their information. Upper motor neurons use glutamate, and the lower motor neurons use acetylcholine. For the body to perform a movement, the signal originates in the primary motor cortex of the brain, which is in the precentral gyrus. The cell bodies of the upper neurons in the primary motor cortex are referred to as BET cells. These cells are specifically located within layer 5 of the motor cortex and have long apyrical dendrites that branch up into the layer. These neurons are responsible for bringing together all the excitatory and inhibitory signals from the cortex and translate them into signals that will initiate or inhibit voluntary movement. The upper motor neurons are regulated by the thalamocortical neurons and calypso projection neurons. There's still much to be learned about this mechanism of regulation, as it is believed that most of the excitatory input to these neurons originates from neurons in layers 2, 3, and 5 in the motor cortex. The axons of the upper motor neurons travel down through the posterior limb of the internal capsule and continue through the cerebral peduncles in the midbrain and eventually to the medullary pyramids. At this location, approximately 90% of the fibers will decussate and continue down the spinal cord in the lateral corticospinal tract. This tract is the largest descending pathway and is in the lateral pedunculus. This is the area where the upper motor neuron will synapse directly into the lower motor neuron in the anterior horn of the spinal cord. The lower motor neuron is responsible for transmitting the signal from the upper motor neuron to the effector muscle to perform a movement. The lower motor neurons can be broken down into three broader types, such as the somatic motor neurons, special visceral efferent motor neurons, and general visceral motor neurons. Somatic motor neurons are in the brainstem and then further divide into three categories: alpha, beta, and gamma. Alpha motor neurons supply extrafusal muscle fibers and are the primary means for skeletal muscle movement. Beta motor neurons are poorly characterized and they supply extrafusal and interfusal fibers. Gamma motor neurons supply muscle spindles and dictate sensitivity and primarily respond to the stretch of the muscle spindle. Although these neurons are called motor neurons, they do not actually perform any motor function. They are there to fine-tune the signal from the lower motor neuron to perform specific muscle contraction. Lower motor neurons also play a role in somatic reflex arc by allowing for a quick reaction to stimuli through muscle contractions that's carried out in the spinal cord and bypasses the brain. Therefore, if you step on something sharp, your reflex quickly moves your foot out of the way, or you have a quicker reflex to grabbing a hot pan that goes directly to the spinal cord, doesn't travel all the way up to the brain, for your muscle to perform that function. Brachial motor neurons supply the head and neck that derive in the brachial arches in the brainstem. Visceral motor neurons contribute to the sympathetic and parasympathetic functions of the autonomic nervous system. There are numerous causes of upper and lower motor neuron dysfunction and injury. And any thought of surgery requires a very individualized approach for each patient, as there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Upper and lower motor neuron lesions cause quite different clinical issues. Upper motor neuron lesions are ones located anywhere from the cortex to the corticospinal tract. These lesions cause hyperreflexia, spasticity, and a positive Babinski reflex. Lesions in the lower motor neuron occur anywhere from the anterior horn of the spinal cord, peripheral nerve, neuromuscular junction, or muscle and cause hyperreflexia, flaccid paralysis, and atrophy. Upper motor neuron syndrome occurs when an injury occurs anywhere along the descending tract before the anterior horn of the spinal cord. Some of these injuries include strokes, traumatic brain injuries, spinal cord injuries, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, primary lateral sclerosis, multiple sclerosis, or anoxic brain injury. Lower motor neuron syndrome occurs with injury to the anterior horn cells or the peripheral nerve. It may mimic a lower motor neuron lesion and are especially important to consider in the differential diagnosis. Other forms of motor neuron disease include the most common amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS. In ALS, which the patient typically presents with weakness, spastic paralysis, and hyperreflexia in the lower limbs, and flaccid paralysis and hyporeflexia in the upper limbs. Most people with ALS have a median life expectancy of 2 to 4 years. Spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA, is a genetic lower motor neuron disease that exhibits degeneration of the motor nuclei in the brainstem. One specific type of SMA is one that presents as an adult and is an X-linked disease. This is a disease that President Kennedy exhibited later on in his life, and it does present when you are an adult. Whenever a patient presents with weakness or any of the above-mentioned motor neuron lesion signs without sensory loss, the doctor should run tests for neuron diseases, as one could be present. In conclusion, the upper and lower motor neurons control all the muscular movements using signals within the body, whether voluntary or involuntary. It's interesting to understand how the brain and spinal cord send these signals along the neurons to the organs and muscles of the body to perform all these tasks. Also, the brain can be bypassed through the reflex arc, and the signal is provided by the spinal cord. So we can react to things faster by just bouncing it from the signal to the spinal cord and back, instead of going all the way to the brain for the brain to process what's exactly going on and then coming back to the affected area. There's still more to be learned about the motor neural system, and as we study and research more, we can find better surgical techniques to repair lesions in damaged areas. And I thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I look forward to responding to your questions. And the next slide is all my references that I used for this presentation. And have a great weekend, and talk to you all in class.